The word why. What a curious word. The kind of word that can make us cringe, feel defensive, or even distant. But you know, sometimes why is the key that can unlock so much to our lives. Join me as we explore the why with fascinating contributors to the world, those that entertain us, inform us, teach us about life, and if we're lucky, inspire the next in all of us. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and welcome to Headroom, a production of Rainlight and co-produced by Old Soul. Let's go. Well, many of you who follow my storytelling and my love of that know that embedded, I think, and if not, shame on me, is the passion that I have for culture and different cultures and finding ways in which we can coexist in a meaningful manner to not only, I think, live in the present, but also support the future and the next generation. And I'm really excited about this conversation because there is an event that, look, I will admit I did not know right out of the gate. And then it's one of those times where you say, I should have known about that. And hopefully you'll have that same response if you haven't heard of it. But CultureCon, they have a number of events. We're going to learn about CultureCon 2024. And I wanted to dig into the founders because I think it's about the people, the reason why they do things, sort of the motivation and the relationships that have to come together to make them effective communicators and collaborators with people all across the country. Let's welcome in Zach Blumenfeld and Nick Lombardino. I was saying to Nick offline, he's got the greatest last name. I just love that. That would really have helped me growing up, going by my last name. Let me tell you a little bit about Zach. Co-founder Zach Blumenfeld. He's scaled companies across various industries with particular expertise in company culture, pet insurance, insurtech, fintech, SaaS, and HR tech. Zach's motto is make what you do matter. I love that, by the way, Zach, because for me, it's always been, you matter. So I love that use of that phrasing that you have. But it speaks volumes about how he leads his life and his commitment to improving the lives of others. These qualities have influenced the start of CultureCon, a movement dedicated to enhancing workplace culture. And the aforementioned Mr. Lombardino, co-founder along with Zach. He was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. Maybe we'll talk a little Big Ten, growing up in Detroit for me and going to Michigan State. Hopefully we can all get along here. He's an imaginative social entrepreneur and community builder. In addition to his work at CultureCon, Nick's a faculty member at Edgewood College teaching social entrepreneurship and small business management. Prior to joining CultureCon full-time, he was a member of the leadership team at Farwell, responsible for creating, developing, and implementing the organization's EX strategies. Gentlemen, it's so nice to spend some time with you. I want to start with, look, this sounds a little bit boilerplate, but I do think it's important. I want to understand the why. We'll learn about what CultureCon is writ large, but I want to understand the why. And let's do that from the initial conversation that the two of you had, because I think a lot of us have ideas. We live in an era now, regardless of generation, where you sort of wake up, if you have an idea and the motivation, maybe and the wherewithal and the resources, you might be able to pull it off. And that's what's, I think, very unique. Tell me about the conversation you first had before you were officially co-founders and when you said to yourselves, I think we can do this. Who led that conversation? Who made the phone call?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to back up a little bit, give a little background to how Nick and I met and how we started to have that conversation. So Nick and I, both born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. Go Badgers. Hopefully you won't hold that against us being a Spartan.
Badgers and Sparty, they can get along.
Our high school mascot was the Spartan, so we have a special place for Spartans in our heart. We actually didn't know each other in high school, but we got connected in our professional careers later on. I had co-founded a company called Third Space, which was a cloud-based software to help companies with company culture, mainly employee engagement, and then also guide the employees on their personal and professional journeys. Before we even had software, we'd have these executive roundtables, and we'd invite in executives from all over the area just to kind of pressure test ideas and make sure that we could build a software to help solve some of these workplace culture challenges. So, they would always start pretty quiet. No one would really want to be the first one to go first. And back then we'd ask a leading question like, tell us about your millennials or something like that. This was like 2015 or something. And Yeah, one CEO would open up and then another one would open up and they would just talk, and people, you could just tell how passionate they would get about this topic of workplace culture. And we'd schedule them for like an hour and a half in the morning, and they would always run late. Some went hours and hours over, because it really was like almost like a therapy session for these executives to share the good, the bad, the ugly about their culture. And so I could see the passion and how much people cared about their people, their culture. So I pitched my co-founders at the software company about this idea to kind of maybe make these events a little bigger. Maybe it's a little, networking and happy hour, bring in a couple local speakers. And with such a humanistic challenge of workplace culture, like it's really touching people's lives personally and professionally. Like software is great, but there has to be a human element to that. Software can't solve it by itself. Um, so they wanted to stick with the software, and one of my co-founders actually connected me to Nick, and we met up for coffee on the Capitol Square at a place called Collectivo Coffee Shop. And he was really the first person I talked to about this idea, and we were just hitting it off, brainstorming, very like-minded, similar silly personalities. And he's like, yeah, let's try it out. So we had planned an event. We called it Mini CultureCon here in Madison. It was, I think, Valentine's Day during a blizzard. We obviously didn't have any of that planning experience, and still
Yeah.
still don't really know what we're doing, but we hit it off. And yeah, we wanted to get 50 people in the room, and we actually had to expand the room size, so we had over 100 people show up, even on Valentine's Day and in a blizzard. And so we decided, let's try to take this to the next level. And yeah, we had our first large annual conference in Madison in 2018, and have been growing it ever since. So yeah.
Nick, what does that say to you? I mean, I would imagine, I mean, that initial sort of coffee that you had with Zach, that there's a bit of a pitch he's having to make. There must have been something that connected. I mean, it's sort of like going into another country and thinking you know a little bit of the language enough to order food, and when you understand that, wow, I communicated that effectively, you sort of, now we can move forward. What was it about the pitch that either hit you at that moment? There was a, maybe you were vulnerable to that kind of conversation and said you had been looking for that.
Listen, admittedly, I'm a pretty risk averse person. So for me to say yes in the moment, I felt there was so much market validation based on what Zach was participating in and orchestrating, and then some things that I was working on locally to Madison that had to do with building communities of practice around things like organizational culture and change management. But I think for me, the selling point was Zach sharing these executives and business leaders and these focus groups and sessions that they were leading. Zach was like, listen, they are so willing to want to share in the abundance of knowledge in a way that's like, oh, you're facing that challenge. I just had to deal with that. And here's my framework on how we went about doing it. Or, hey, let me introduce you to our HR director who can give you more support and ideas. So to me, it was like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, we just have to extrapolate this a little bit further and create the container or the space for these conversations to happen. And it felt like we can do that. It didn't seem like that big of a leap to us.
And so there has to be a bit of a turn, right? Because there's a difference between, let's say, as a parallel, running a production company where I can bring the camera set up, I can bring the mics, but I've got to have a storyteller, a producer, right? So you can, I like the, finding a container, Nick. I thought that was a great way to put that. But I would imagine at some point you had to look at each other and say, okay, we figured this out. We can bring people in the middle of a blizzard. But at what point do we turn and sort of carve a new path where there's education or there's some professional development or exchange of ideas that is not only facilitated, but I think sort of presented in a way where people come hungry, right? It's not just
Mm.
airing grievances. Cause I think right out of the gate, that can be, if it's been, sort of boiling up, I just want to air my grievances, right? I've been living on an island. I don't know how to handle these issues. The new generation, it's changed my way I'm thinking about employee engagement and talent management and culture. How did you approach that, the educational component of CultureCon?
I'll take this one because I think you can piggyback off of this. The ethos of our organization, we recognized that we did not want to build an HR conference. We did not want this to be a community that was exclusive just to let's just say historically, who the gatekeepers of workplace culture maybe would have been. So for us, recognizing that we wanted this to be a very diverse audience pool, the way we felt most comfortable creating a program was to speak to the individual and kind of profess this idea that we believe any individual, regardless of your role or your responsibilities within an organization, you have a vested interest in making work more meaningful for yourself and others in your organization. So programmatically, underneath this wide umbrella of workplace culture, we knew that whomever we're having come up on stage to speak, whatever workshop we're curating, or whatever types of connections that are happening at the conference, they need to tie back to the individual feeling like I'm being equipped with the right pragmatic framework or even frankly shared connections so that I can go back to my place of work and make some sort of change, however big or small. Because the reality is, a lot of the people that come to the conference, there are executives, there are business owners, and there are VPs and directors, but a lot of the time they're just frontline managers of teams. And they're trying to figure out, how do I make work more meaningful for myself and my team members so that we can come to work and we can show up as our authentic selves. It can be more fulfilling and ultimately more productive for our organization when we're coming together in this way. So that's how we feel most comfortable as an organization, is this idea of like, we want to make work more meaningful for ourselves first and foremost, and let that stretch out across teams and levels and organizations.
And Zach, let me add to that and get your thoughts on this. Help me understand what you've learned over these years when it comes to the buy-in from. I appreciate, Nick, when you're talking about this, really a cross section, right? You did not want to be just another sort of gatekeeper conference, where if your LinkedIn didn't hit a certain profile, you were not going to be a part of it. And so in doing that, that would say to me, and I don't know if this is correct or too far afield, that we're seeing the corporations of all sizes, that there's a buy-in to, maybe they don't have the answer, but they see in front of them on the horizon line that they've got to have some approach to understanding the talent that is sort of within the four walls, whether that's digitally or physically, of their organization, and that the increase that you have in the buy-in to have a cross section of attendees would denote that there has to be a greater buy-in in general. Like if we're looking at trend lines, is that fair? Is that something that you've seen, that we're seeing maybe a larger buy-in, even if they don't have the answers themselves?
Yeah, totally, 100%. It's interesting because if you look at the Gallup survey data or all the thought leaders and around employee engagement, things like that, employee engagement or disengagement has stayed pretty stagnant the last decade or so, if not longer. Um, so it shows like while there's more buy-in, the same challenges are there. And I think it's because, as a human, I'm different than Nick, I'm different than you, and if we're all on the same team, we're all going to bring in our own diverse perspectives and values, and that's going to really shake up how that culture of our team is happening, and then also of our department, of our organization. And you're constantly churning through employees, so there's no recipe for success when it comes to culture. It just has to be something that's always top of mind and that you're continuously working on. But to your point, I think there is more buy-in, and that's why we've grown as an organization. That's why our conference, is now sold out, and um, each year we have more and more people from a larger geographic reach, all different industries, come to Madison in the summer to celebrate workplace culture and learn and grow. And I think it is because there is more buy-in, both at the leadership level, but also just like Nick mentioned, frontline managers, heads of departments. They want to make work better for people, as we like to say, make work suck less, because we're all humans and we spend so much time, most of our time at work. It should be a meaningful experience for us all.
Let's look at the arc of CultureCon and when you're looking at feedback post sort of event that you get from folks. And also, I would imagine information or people who are seeking to speak and participate from an educational perspective, right? Of us sharing knowledge. Can we glean anything from that? Because I think what's fascinating, especially in the corporate space, is that we have been institutionalized in the West through education and then into workplaces, that everything has to have sort of a shelf or a box that we put something in. But yet culture is kind of squirrely in a beautiful way, right? In that, to your point, the three of us collaborating on something is going to be very different than if we sub out Nick for somebody from a very different background. And that we can't maybe put something together that's pragmatic or that we can sort of box and replicate and scale. And that would say to me that if we start to look at the arc of the feedback that you've gotten, would that indicate what people are looking for? That in essence, maybe they're feeling a little bit better and more comfortable sitting in the unknown?
Mm, I think so. What's really interesting is kind of reflecting on programmatically, a lot of the topics that are top of mind for our audience tend to trail some sort of economic factor. So, as an example, in past years where we've had a really tight labor market, some of the most requested topics among our audience is, hey, can you create more content around how do you create a competitive employer brand? How do you optimize the candidate experience? How do you create an onboarding and orientation process that can get people up to speed as quickly as possible? So, what I think is really interesting is over the years, it feels like the business imperative for organizational culture has been catapulted forward a lot. I'm totally making an assumption right here, but I think a lot of it has to do with the maturity and access of data. So it's becoming much more accessible to be able to quantify impact and business performance related to organizational culture. So if we're using the example of labor markets as a data point, now it's becoming a lot easier to quantify productivity loss and wasted time on what it looks like when you don't have high employee retention and when you need to try and compete for talent in the marketplace. So for Zach and I, we admittedly do not consider ourselves workplace culture experts necessarily. There's certain topics we're dangerous in, but what we are connectors. So we like to poll our audience each year to get an understanding of, like what are the things that are top of mind for you, your team, and your organization, and then let us curate the speakers that we feel can fit that mold. So that's how we approach programming throughout the year.
Zach, I'm curious about entrepreneurs, right? I have a 12 and a 10-year-old, and they talk about how many companies they'll start. And I think that's pretty common around the US. It's just an assumption. When I grew up, I don't even know if we knew the term entrepreneur, right? It was someone had maybe an insurance company or they had a bakery. If you had an idea, you were an inventor. You didn't have sort of this business acumen to be able to develop something. Now, when it came to entrepreneurs sort of exploding over the last decade and thinking about engagement and trying to port over 1099 or contractors to W-2s and full time, a lot of entrepreneurs that I've interviewed, there was this conversation, whether it was with themselves or their investors or their spouse, about how do I entice and support those that are believing in me? And then they would go out and they would source all of these sort of I don't know, they felt a little bit like party favors. Like it was, they were these sort of sourcing, like I'm a small company, I can't afford the benefit packages of a big corporation. So I'm going to sort of link into things where you can select what that benefit is, right? Movie tickets, gym memberships. And what I appreciate is it made us think, I think, more creatively about what people see as a benefit to the culture that they have chosen to be a part of, right? That choice is a part of that. Have you learned much? I mean, sort of what's your takeaway from a CultureCon experience when it comes to entrepreneurs and how they potentially have impacted the way in which we think at the corporate level? It's like if college football starts to shift in the Big Ten, well, guess what? That may impact the NFL game, right? So I'm just really curious as to what we've seen from entrepreneurs in this space around engagement.
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point about like the fringe benefits and things like that. I think when we think about culture, and this goes back to my third space days in the software company, a lot of the research we did was actually on not extrinsic motivators, but intrinsic motivators. And we partnered with a psychologist down at the University of Chicago who specialized in self-determination theory. So it was all about how do we use intrinsic motivators to motivate this top 1% of some of the brightest people in the world who are going through this really difficult educational program. So a lot of that translated right directly into what we were doing with culture in the workplace. And it included giving someone autonomy. So kind of like they can choose their own path. but the main thing is that autonomy created trust in that relationship, and that trust is what's going to really enhance the workplace culture. So I think extrinsic motivators definitely play a purpose in those benefits, especially for like a small startup or an entrepreneur who's working with 1099 contractors, or in my case, like when I've started companies, it's people are just believing in what you're doing and have a little skin in the game with equity. So there is purpose for those extrinsic motivators, but if it doesn't have the intrinsic motivators, it doesn't work. So the mix of having that intrinsic plus extrinsic is going to get you a good recipe to success when it comes to culture.
It's fascinating too. You just reminded me of this. The amount of studies that have been put towards uh, early stage companies when they're still in that startup mode and have such a tight, cohesive culture, trying to study that and then see how can something similar be applied to broader teams or larger organizations. I think of the book Humanocracy by the Hamill brothers. But what they talk about is in an early stage company, it's easy to feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself. The team's small. There's an abundance of trust, usually with the founders building out the team. There's this sense of autonomy and wearing a bunch of different hats for you to just get to that single goal in front of you. So this feeling of you know, little milestone wins feel like colossal achievements, and all of you are just so collaborative and connected to one another. It's that little microcosm of workplace culture that startups have been able to hone over the years, that now big businesses are trying to be like, I want that magic. What is that magic that make people feel like they're so, you know, embedded with one another, and how do we bring that into, you know, larger working environments? So yeah, man, I think you hit the nail on the head.
Headroom is produced by Old Soul, a one-stop marketing agency that understands the power of brand and nuance. Reach out to my guy Matt at Old Soul and supercharge your brand and content strategy. That's Old Soul. Shoot Matt a note at aoldsoul.com. That's AOLDSOUL.com. And now, back to our guest. Nick, a follow up on that. So I love that. It's sort of that magic. Like, what's that ingredient? What's the special sauce that we're applying here? I'm curious as to, it's like a lot of times when you approach when new things are on the horizon or new things sort of reveal themselves in corporate settings, it's like the software adoption curve, or like in education technology. When we put in ed tech, it was, well, let's just digitize everything. Well, that really wasn't ed tech. That was just sort of we're scared, let's dip our toe. But at some point, the game of life or the game of sports slows down, and we can start to see what's in front of us in a much more calm, I think, manner, where we can then apply our skills more proficiently. And I'm wondering, as you're starting to see these conversations grow and build and sustain over time around culture, are we getting better? I'm not going to say that. I don't know if there's ever we've reached a destination, but are we getting better at understanding the power of difficult conversations? Because we've had events across our country and world, for that matter, that have been sort of tentpole. Sort of tentpole discussions around, or that are very fear-based, because we don't know if we're going to offend, or we don't know if we are inclusive or understanding and thoughtful enough with our words. But I would hope that as we start to understand culture better, we become more comfortable. It slows down for us a bit, and we can actually make decisions that aren't just sort of patching a hole so that the dam doesn't break. Is that fair, Nick?
I think it's totally fair. And to be honest with you, I have that exact same question. But where I think I find hope in it is that difficult conversations really root back to this shared sense of accountability. I was once told that having a value of accountability means that you are drawn to managing difficult conversations. And then when you hear that, you get all these feelings of like, I don't like that. That sounds like adversarial and abrasive. I don't want difficult conversations. But at the heart of it, it just means you're truth seeking. You're just trying to find what the underlying truth is behind a collaboration with a teammate, or maybe even at deeper level, their lived experience. And I think that's where we're getting to more as a society. If we can put aside our fears of potentially maybe creating an uncomfortable conversation or offending somebody in some way. Once you're able to get to that kind of like root lived experience, assuming it's done in a very respectful way, the best work comes out of that. Like Zach and I have difficult conversations all the time, but we know we can always have them because it's grounded in this place of I'm going to say love, because I think that's actually an accurate
Totally.
Until your next difficult conversation.
Right, until our next difficult conversation. Now, that's not to say that you're going to go out and love all of your teammates, but the point is, if you know that you're able to have difficult conversations with one another, you're going to be able to produce so much more valuable stuff. It's going to be so much easier for you to work with one another long term because you're flexing that muscle of being like, hey, I know what it's like to have a hard conversation with somebody, and I can do it. So I don't need to shy away from it anymore. I can kind of lean into it a little bit from time to time, assuming that there's shared respect and whatnot. But yeah, I think we're getting better at it.
Zach, I want to talk about value because my assumption would be that as we improve, as maybe our EQ increases, and our acknowledgement that our ability to understand the emotionality around us is actually a value that we want to add to our teams, our organizations, and corporations, I would hope that, or I would maybe forecast that I would, if I'm a leader, that I would be able to look out for talent that also has increased EQ, and that maybe I didn't value that prior to when I was thinking about going through the candidate process and hiring and building my teams. I mean, I think about all these conversations on the soccer field with other dads and those in management positions talking about the biggest stressor happens to be when they have to either let somebody go or they have to add to their team because they don't want to get it wrong. They want to get it right. Do you start to have conversations, Zach, at CultureCon with folks just off to the side when you're having breakfast or at a happy hour function, where you're starting to see that maybe people are looking for? It's like, well, I didn't realize that that was something I should be in essence shopping for when it comes to building a team.
Yeah, and those conversations are probably one of my most favorite part about CultureCon is just the casual conversation in the hallway or at one of the lunch meals, things like that. And yeah, those are where you really like have deep conversations with other attendees, whether it's Nick and I or attendees, talking to other attendees. But that does come up, and I think if you take a look at the LinkedIn job postings and you were to compare one from now and 5-6 years ago, they're totally different. They're more transparent. They do showcase a company's values. And I think that transparency, it draws in a different type of person. Like if I was looking at job postings and one of them was very open about their culture, promoting their values, had a salary range on their benefits, not just kind of like the actual duties that I'm going to perform, like a kind of old school job posting, I'm probably going to not apply to one of them and apply to the one that really showcases the company and the culture and the values. And I think that is part of the interview process now, is trying to understand someone not based on their past experience as much in the workplace, but who you are as a person. And I think that really is like the culture conversation, as we talked about earlier, coming more to the forefront, being able to know someone as a human being, not just a worker bee. And that's kind of how, like, when we started Third Space, we got our name, is like you have your historical first place and second place, and then this third place, which is really a blend of work and home, and being able to be who you are at home in the workplace as well.
Nick, what's the impact of Gen Z and their mantra of purpose over profits on the company culture, workplace culture space?
I think it's just that. I think it's impact. I think
Mm.
we have a generation of individuals who have grown up in a world where I don't think it's misguided to say that there have been a lot of existential things that have come across their childhood experience and now into adulthood. So for many of them, they want to feel like they're doing something to usher in some level of social or environmental good in the world. And now that's become a business imperative, frankly, for the better. So a lot of companies you'll find now are, hopefully, if they're doing it in a authentic way, they're trying to figure out how can we create new products and services that not only provide economic gain for our company, but simultaneously produce some sort of social or environmental good.
Has the
And that's
conversation changed, Nick, when it comes then to retention? Because it feels like that's an area, that's a rub. Because, growing up, it was they just assumed that, Nick, Zach, and Rod are going to, once we get them, they're going to stay and just matriculate throughout our organization. And yet, this is me speaking. I think companies are in danger if they apply that same methodology today, because there are young professionals that may want to spend 5 years. They see it almost like a post. There's a post that they're taking up for 5 years, and then they'll be very open about it, and they're going to move to something else because they're looking back and they're stitching together a a story, their professional story. Um, but I don't know if people have the tools for that, because it's like the API, right? It's like the API into, if we have good culture, does that mean we can support people who we're investing in financially and organizationally, who are very overt about leaving in 3 to 5 years? And can we be okay with that and create this sort of healthy loop, this ecosystem?
for many businesses, that's something that they have accepted as being a part of their operating model, is this idea that there's going to be a sizable percentage of our workforce that are going to come to work here for just a finite amount of time. And we're going to find a way to make that still a very rewarding experience for both the company's productivity and that experience of the employees. Frankly, there's a massive software company outside of Madison called Epic. It's a large healthcare software platform. And that's a company that has truly latched onto the idea of, we might have people for 5 years, but a lot of times it's going to be way less than that. So we're going to give them some incredible professional skills and experiences, and essentially a launching pad to get them into this next stage of their career. And I think it's becoming more and more common, because you're right, Rod. It's this. I'm going to get super cliche and share a quote that was pretty poignant to me when I first heard it. But it's a Howard Thurman quote, and he says, uh, "Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I think this generation, this Gen Z, is really latching on to this idea of self-exploration, discovery, and then bringing their best sense of self into this world. And so that's going to change, right? Like self-exploration and values from time to time change. And if that's the case, then perhaps what they're doing for work is going to change along the way. And I think that that's what we're seeing and feeling right now.
And Zach, sustainability is a major issue for Gen Z. Do, I would think that it would be pretty beneficial for those in workplace culture to apply the principles of sustainability, right, for a sustainable planet, to the way in which we might think about talent, those in our organizations, right? It's not 9 to 5. It's, how do we understand benefit packages that support a single mom or a dad, or mom or dad, or they're going back for a secondary degree? um, I would think that that would be, man, that would really interest me if I was a Gen Zer looking to work for your organization, is that some of those tenets of sustainability would apply to my own life within your culture.
Yeah, totally. And I think we see that in the types of startups that are kind of around this maybe HR tech ecosystem or in the benefit space. Um, yeah, just even our sponsors at CultureCon or other similar types of organizations popping up that kind of play in that space of like really catering to one's personal life and not just having this standard health, dental, you know, eye care, life insurance package. It's like, let's customize this to something that fits who you are and your kind of like your story and your family, because everyone's background is different. What's going on at home doesn't always shed light into the workplace, so being able to give them some options and choosing that more sustainable package. And then I think if we look at sustainability from the corporate standpoint, at CultureCon, we recently, in the past couple of years, became a benefit corporation, a B Corp, and that movement is growing exponentially. More and more companies are trying to get that B Corp certification to kind of put a rubber stamp that, hey, we're doing business, but we're doing it the right way and in a sustainable way. And companies can almost use that as a marketing tool, whether you're looking at Gen Z or now Gen Alpha coming into the workplace, who sustainability is in the forefront of what they look for in a company. So yeah, I think, millennials kind of had that mindset. Gen Z has really carried that out. And now Gen Alpha, we talk about sustainability, environmental and social justice issues. And going back to what you were talking about, your kids wanting to start a million different companies, millennials were super entrepreneurial. Gen Z kind of took that to the next level. And now Gen Alpha, entering the workplace very soon, is going to take that to an all new level. So it just keeps extrapolating on those different issues.
And every time you add another generation, I feel that much older, Zach.
I'm sorry. I'm starting to feel
it's like a conveyor belt. I can't stop. uh, Nick, where does storytelling fit in all of this from an active, not by accident, not by those side conversations at the sort of classic water cooler? Are you seeing that this is an active technique that organizations are having to basically sort of skill up so that they actively deploy that into their engagement strategies? Because we come from eras where data, it was sort of like, just put the data out there, put the press release out there and fill it with a bunch of data, and that should calm down the masses. And that's just sort of cheap and lazy at this point in a corporate setting. Where does storytelling fit in, and how active is it from your perspective?
It's so it's so funny to say that storytelling has become kind of a lost art and now becoming a business imperative. Uh, I tend to think about it this way. Many of us maybe had like a great uncle or aunt or grandparent that could just own a room with a story. And you're just kind of like captivated by their every word on how they could contextualize, frame a scenario, and pull you into something where now like truly what you're feeling is empathy. Like you're putting yourself in the shoes of the person who's telling the story. And I think that is the business imperative, is this feeling of empathy has unfortunately been lost in so many ways in our personal and professional lives. So trying to get people back to having conversations with one another where you can put yourself in their shoes. And I honestly can't think of a better mechanism than storytelling to do it. And our brains over the past however many years have just been so used to consuming information in different ways, whether it's like written text or just like rapid fire like nonsense coming at you through a screen. That art of storytelling is kind of getting our brain back to how we've evolved over hundreds of years to understand somebody else's lived experience, kind of put ourselves in their shoes. So I think that's why it's becoming such a prominent business imperative here moving forward.
Zach, as we put a bow on this conversation, I want to ask each of you, relative to your own personal stories. Um, what I think is fascinating about entrepreneurs, I just love the courage. I love no matter what, I've got to wake up tomorrow and come up with an idea, a solution, solve a problem, engage a new conversation that might be difficult. Um, there are those moments where once you've achieved sort of, sold out status, or, that you say, okay, well, what's next? And we struggle with, I think, that internal hamster wheel. And so I'm curious as to how this venture for you has changed you. And has it changed your relationship to time and the way in which you think about your own value and how you can contribute? Because I think once we're always in a rush as an entrepreneur. But do you give yourself a chance to sit back and think about the growth that you've had and the impact it's had on you? Because we're talking about culture here, and I would be remiss, just as an interviewer, to not ask about the impact on your own constitution through this process.
Yeah, it's a good reflective question. I think one of the challenges with any entrepreneur is that you're working so hard and you don't take time to appreciate everything that you're building. Even if, like, I've been a part of a lot of different startups. I've had a couple good ones, but most of them have failed. And even in those ones that have failed, like taking time to realize what all the cool things that you've built, but also all the lessons you've learned along the way. And yeah, with CultureCon, it's kind of like the most lived experience I've had yet in my professional career. It's the most fun. It's the most meaningful and impactful work. And to do it with Nick, it's it's a lot of fun. My best friend.
Well,
So yeah,
see, that's powerful to talk about it that way. And I love that, the most lived, right? That says something about what it is, and that to me is what people. That is the eureka for folks, is they can find an environment where they feel that they can experience sort of the spectrum of emotions of what it means to be human and still sort of come out on the other side. You know what? That's sort of a life well lived in that manner. Nick, put a capper on this, right? So you hear Zach's reflection, and he integrated in relationship, right? Again, I'm going back to, I sound like that old guy in the lawn, and I'm not. But there was that old adage, like, never go into business with someone like a friend or a family member, right? In essence, you want to have sort of these clear lines, which always said to me, that just means you're headed for sort of a corporate divorce of some sort. Um, but talk about this new, I think, path where entrepreneurs are saying, you know what, I want to work with people that I understand, that I get, but that also challenge me and sort of allow me to kind of play, bumper bowling here. I need to bounce around a little bit and know that I'm not going to go off the edge here, and that is important in the growth, not only of CultureCon, but of your professional and personal relationship with Zach, and also yours with yourself.
To talk about lessons learned through our own entrepreneurial journey, I think this will resonate with current entrepreneurs, people in the broader workforce, and just us on a personal level. Um, Zach and I discovered early on how deep our imposter syndrome was as entrepreneurs, and the stress and the anxiety that would coincide with us feeling like we had to, let's just say, perform in front of others in an aura of where we were feeling like we're just pretending right now, like we're not experts in this. People are going to suss us out really quickly and know that these guys are just making it up. And it's impossible to quantify how much stress coincided with these thoughts and feelings. And so the lesson learned was to lean into uh, professing when we feel like we are not, like Zach said earlier in this conversation, like, we weren't event planners when we started this, and we still don't feel like we're event planners, right? And opportunities for us to feel comfortable, especially in front of large crowds. Zach and I aren't public speakers. We don't love standing up on stage and talking to people. But what makes it way easier for us is when we feel like we can be silly with our audience, because that's the only way Zach and I know how to feel comfortable in these types of settings. And that's how we work together. We're just two silly dudes. And so the lesson learned that I've had is to, as often as possible, find those opportunities where you can bring your authentic self forward and not be discouraged from owning it in the moment of like, hey, this is how we feel most comfortable, right? And talking to in moments where you feel like this isn't our arena of expertise. And that's largely how we've now built our entire business model. We're not workplace culture experts, but we like to think we're pretty good at being the conduit that connects the right audience with that right level of expertise.
Thanks for taking the plunge into Headroom, where we uncover the why behind the what and who impacting our lives. Headroom is a production of Rainlight and co-produced by our friends at Old Soul. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger, and this is Headroom.